believe the conversation before we started this room, but they probably would. Right.
It's brilliant. Right, I'm muting you and looking for you going live.
Hi, everybody. Right. Now, those of you who were here a couple of weeks ago may remember that when I took the helm, it all went disastrously wrong. So I was a bit like, I don't want to do this ever again, in case I'm cursing us. But the others have very generously, stroke foolishly, said to me, well, you give it another try again today. And then if it all goes horribly wrong, we'll know that it's you. So yeah. And I'm really, really scared. Like, I'm trying to accept their requests to come up, and already it's not working. Hello.
I'm here. I'm whited out though.
Oh,
look at me. Oh,
like your ring light's on bright, isn't it?
I'm a ghost.
A very bright ring
it's
light.
The exposure on the anyway. Yeah. It's
so
not your fault, John says.
Thank you, John.
It is, John. It is.
Having said that, John, I thank you for your kindness, but would like to point out that we're about 60 seconds in. So there's plenty of time for it all to go horribly wrong. And it's me, so it's very possibly the case. So this week we are talking about Britain's greatest monarch, or who you think that might be. And this was inspired by this magazine. BBC History magazine. We've all got one, look. Oh, this is not a sponsored event, but should they wish to sponsor us in the future, we're happy for that.
Absolutely.
So if anyone out there
wants to sponsor us,
we're good. John says he's an optimist. Thank you, John. Yes, there is an article. We need to be with her on here. There's an article in this month's edition. So this is the February 2022 edition. Just for clarification, who is Britain's greatest monarch? That's a nice picture of the crown. All right. So what they've done is they've taken, I think it's 12 historians. Oh, lots of hearts coming up the screen. 12 historians who have put their case for who they think is Britain's greatest monarch and why. So 12 different ones. So 12 different, they have come up with 12 different people. One is Scottish, one is Welsh. That was really nice as well. And we've gone all the way back from, I think, to about the 13th, 14th century up until her current queen, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So we were looking at this, and we've also thought, we read them all and we expressed some of our dissimilarities with some of the things that have been written. Some of them we agree with, some of them we have different opinions on, some of them we were a bit like, is there more than one monarch of that name? Because that's very different to the one that I know about. So we're not necessarily going to say which historians have written each one, because we're not disparaging anybody. And it's the brilliant articles in the magazine. So I would definitely say read it, because some of it's quite thought-provoking as well. What I think I will just mention, obviously there's a level of subjectivity in this, whatever the situation. But of course, I suppose when you say greatest monarch, we kind of think, well, who was the most positive? Who did the most? Who's left the best legacy? But we have to put that in time contextually as well. What makes a great monarch now is not the same, what Queen Elizabeth II does for us now and does so beautifully in so many ways would really not have been what was required in the 13th century, for example. So you have to put a bit of context in what was required at the time, what was accepted at the time, and also what do people mean by great? Do they mean positive, successful, left a fantastic legacy, or do they mean this person just did a lot of stuff that changed the face of the country, that put us on the international stage? So great doesn't necessarily have to mean, I suppose, they were a wonderful, kind, heartwarming human being.
That's good, because none of them would.
The competition would be high. So my caveat, for example, that would be Henry VIII. So Henry VIII was a bit of a git, really, a deceased git. We like those, a deceased git. But you could argue that he was a great monarch in the sense that he achieved a lot happened, and his story drives people into history. It has a big impact. Okay, but then you could look at another monarch and say they've done a lot for international relations and that type of thing. So there's perhaps different ways of interpreting great based on a number of factors. It's a very roundabout way of saying it's a bit subjective. But anyway, let us know what you think, obviously. Different people will have different thoughts. So if we're talking about a particular monarch, do let us know your thoughts. If there's someone that you love or hate and you want to bring them up, then do. I am going to, ladies, who would like to start? Do you want to start with bringing your nominations to the forefront, ones that maybe aren't in the magazine?
I just want to hop. I just want to jump in. I don't know how old everybody is that is watching this, but if anybody here is preparing for their history exams, GCSE or A-level, or indeed whatever else, what the lovely Catherine has just shown you is how you set out your answers in your exams. You define the term of what is being asked in the question and how you are understanding it, and then you respond to it in that way. And then, of course, you provide the sources and evidence. And if you want to do extra specially well, then do make sure that you're offering counterpoints and conflicting arguments. And friends, if you have got a child who's sitting their GCSEs or A-levels, point out that the people who'll be marking their essays will be other teachers from around the country who are tired and probably hungry, and they would like a biscuit. So if you
send a biscuit,
put a biscuit in your paper.
Tape a biscuit to the paper, but also principally do make sure that you tell your examinee that neat handwriting, legible handwriting is always their friend. So Catherine, well done there, because you've just shown people exactly how to answer a GCSE, A-level, even I would say a university history paper question, or for that matter, English or anything else in the humanities.
I'll give you one.
I mean, I can confer that upon you, I guess. Why not? Yeah, let's say that's the case. That's what's happened. Did we give the caveat as well?
No, we didn't. That's where I thought you were going with that.
Right. So
I'll give it now.
Go on then.
Friends,
you do it very
Romans,
well.
Countrymen, lend me your ears. This is History After Dark, friends, and I can see a lot of familiar faces. But for those of you who are not a familiar face, this can be filthy. If you are in the presence of young ears, I know I talked about GCSE and A-level students. They are, in my mind, old enough. They can see the filth. They can hear the filth. But if you've got really small ones, the type who might repeat things at school and you don't want to get called up by the headmaster or headmistress, headphones, please, or wait, it's on the replay. Alternatively, if you are at work, this is potentially going to be NSFW. So again, either headphones or watch it on the replay. We love having you here. We don't want to send you away, but I also think that forewarned is forearmed, and this is where we get spicy. So let's talk about some deceased gits, because there are a lot in history, and we're going to try and wade through the mire of shit to try and figure out who's the best king.
I love how when you start talking about how inappropriate it is, loads of hearts come up.
Yay! More.
So I think what we'll do is we will look at some of the ones that are in the magazine first, and then we will maybe jump in with one or two each of our own that we would make a case for. I think I have somebody I'd like to make a case for.
Okay.
So, and I have a history degree, so I'm now more qualified to make this statement than I was 3 minutes ago. So,
good times.
Yeah. That's the easiest degree ever. All right. Would anybody like to start? There's some controversial ones. We might not have time to get through all of them, obviously. So we're not being kingist or queenist or anything if we leave anyone out.
There's a few in here that I was surprised to see, I have to say.
Indeed.
I think I'm going to go straight for the one I was the most surprised to see, I suppose, and that's Victoria.
Sorry,
it's like,
say, John has said I've got a history and a tech degree now.
Oh,
love it. Why were you surprised to see Victoria?
Because, what does she do? Seriously,
I mean, Victoria Sponge
during her reign.
Victoria Sponge.
Yes, she lived long enough to have a cake named after her. Cake. Well done. But she herself, It is a good cake, unless they make it with that synthetic cream. And I do have to ask, it's like the coffee, is it real or is it not? If it's not, I'm sorry, I'm not partaking. And that is what happens with it. Yeah, do not be serving synthetic cream. Sorry, I was just reading a Mad Journalist. Shout out to the teachers that, despite being tired of the students who are literally get ill from stress during written exams, they make sure, I could do an oral exam. That's very nice of them.
That's
pragmatic teachers. You had good teachers by the time.
Yeah. A good teacher who goes the extra mile is absolutely worth their weight in gold. We do not pay them enough. We do not treat them well enough. And frankly, that's bullshit. So yay for teachers and boo hiss for anybody who is a bad teacher, but also is bad to a good teacher.
Yes.
As I say, you wait till your kids get to secondary school and then you come back and tell me how all the teachers are great. Because there's unfortunately some who are not, and that's the problem. Anyway, because it's not fair on the ones that are very, very good. I'm sure they must be banging their head against their desk a lot of the time. So Victoria, because it's like, really, what does she actually do? A lot happened during her reign, but what did she do other than have temper tantrums, stamp her feet, and be an incredibly bad mother, which you could argue led to a whole heap of issues afterwards?
Yeah,
Straight in with the controversy.
Harsh.
Yeah, I don't think you're harsh. I think, however, if we hadn't had Victoria with her spectacular capacity to produce offspring, then we would not have had the events of the start of the century, which, don't get me wrong, were horrendous, but they have shaped who we are. So while obviously World War I and II were not a good time for anybody concerned, it was hella misery, it has certainly shaped the nation that we live in and the world that we live in, for that matter. For good and for evil, I guess. So I suppose, and of course, she could never have intended that. And probably she could have turned the car around on some of that stuff. So the choices that are made about putting her offspring into every royal house and then being, as you said, a terrible mother, it does essentially create the conflict that creates World War I, that then in turn knocks onto World War II, then in turn knocks onto the Cold War. So in many ways, the conflicts, I would say, of the entire 20th, and I would say actually the 21st century, are probably traceable back to Victoria and her matrimonial choices.
Carving up of the Middle East, the whole shebang. Yeah. So there you go. So anyway, so that wasn't for best, was it? It was supposed to be doing best.
It says here, she's described as an industrial innovator. So it says Victoria went on to define an age. Under her rule, Britain enjoyed the fruits of the Industrial Revolution, railways, mighty bridges of iron and steel, scientific innovation, and the world's first underground train hurtling beneath the streets of London.
Which she had nothing to do with.
But that's what I was about to say. So just because they happened when she was the monarch, it doesn't mean that they were a result of her own actions. I think her husband obviously probably influenced some of those, but then
he was more hands-on. Yeah, but
you love him, don't you, Kat?
Oh God, no! He's awful. He is awful. No. But what I will say about Albert is that he was incredibly interested by innovation. John, was she an innovator? Not in the ways that are being described. She's not as interested in things like locomotive engines as Albert is. She lives an incredibly sheltered life, and she's had a very sheltered life from childhood. I think that she has an absolute desire, certainly at the start of her reign, to do her very best, but she's just, to my mind, ill-equipped. I think that the commentary about the wonders of the Industrial Revolution and the benefits that befell upon the nation, whom for whom was that benefit? Because it was for the very rich, they got richer, and for those who were forced, in effect, because there was limited other choice to go and work in factories, their conditions and their working life got exponentially worse and harder. It was serfdom by another name. So I don't think that is in any way something that she reigned over a nation that saw some of the worst depravity and deprivation of many monarchs. The slum living and the Victorian back-to-backs and these kinds of poor housing choices, and what could be in these enormous conurbations, because everybody wants to work in factories, so everybody's in cities. So the sensation and the experience of extreme poverty and disease is just allowed to run roughshod. And then to talk about empire and her as Empress of India. Oh, and she goes and learns from her little, in quotes, munchie. I think we are surely past the point where we're going to try to whitewash, and I'm using that term deliberately, empire. Surely we are past the point, and let's start having a conversation. Oh, she brings all of these riches and diamonds. Yeah. She steals them. The Koh-i-Noor diamond that was shown off at the Great Exhibition that did not get the public joy that they thought it was going to get. This extraordinary, massive diamond that she stole from a child who she then essentially, in quotes, adopted, pretty much. Certainly, she took his land from him and became empress of the realm that he should have ruled over. To then take this diamond and to show it off at the Great Exhibition, and when it doesn't get the kind of response that her and Albert expect, their decision then is to have it cut. They cut the Koh-i-Noor diamond and they make it into something that they like. It's just craven, and it makes me livid. It makes me livid.
You can be livid. You can.
I think it's a no for Victoria. She's coming rather down the pecking order, isn't she?
Yeah, John says so. Victoria is out.
Yeah. Okay. We could wax lyrical about the shortcomings of Victoria and her era for a long time, but I suppose that's not what we're here for tonight.
Right, Kat, pick us one and give us a yay or nay.
Right, let's go in. Let's dive in. Let's do Henry, because they put Henry VIII in here. And see, now I think when we think about what makes a great monarch, do we want to say that there needs to be a degree of intent in seeing, at least to a certain degree, that how the consequences of one's actions may improve the state of affairs for your nation? Because to me, that is what a good monarch is: somebody who leaves the country better than when they found it. And to my mind, that if that is what we're taking as this is what a great king is, that rules Henry out for a number of reasons. First and foremost, he debases the currency to such a degree that he earns the nickname Old Copper-Nose. When you have a currency system that is based upon the idea that face value matches the metal within the coin, and that currency can then be spent across the known world, in effect. People aren't exchanging currency. They're like, this is a bag of gold. It's got one king's face on it. That's fine. It's all gold. But the second you realise, and people overseas realise, that coin from England, from Henry's England, ain't worth shit, all of a sudden, you could have a bag of underbased coinage, completely underbased, that's English. But that very, very good levels of gold in that coin, people are going to assume the whole bag is debased, or at least vast quantities of the bag are debased, to such a degree that there is such a high copper level that the gold rubs off, and that's why you see the copper nose. So if you try and trade with English currency anywhere else in the world, they're charging you double, triple, screaming inflation. And equally, if you try and use English coin at home, nobody wants to take it because it isn't worth anything. And essentially, he knocks this down the road. The person who ends up fixing this nonsense is Elizabeth. She has to do a recoinage. But the way a recoinage works is you have to bring in all of the coin back into the mints, melt the whole thing down, take out the high levels of impurity. It needs some impurity because otherwise the gold will just fall apart. Then you have to put the appropriate amount of impurity to make enough of an alloy there, and then you remint the coin. So somebody could come in with 15 pounds of gold coin. That's an enormous amount, but we're just going to go with it. They come in with 15 pounds of gold coin into the mint. That 15 pounds then gets melted down, reminted. But having taken out all of those impurities, you might be leaving with 10 or even 5 pounds of gold coin. That's an expensive morning. Very unpopular to do a recoinage. And that debasement comes in by increments. So Henry absolutely, considering his father gets this reputation for being a miser and leaving his son an amazing inheritance, well, he squanders that within his reign. Let's also remember that he murders 2 of his wives. And that shouldn't ever be glossed over.
Well, he murders 2. He basically leads to the misery and death of the first one. Might not have actually executed her, but
yeah. And also, and yeah. The legacy of Reformation is something that has been spilling blood on these islands in my lifetime. The legacy of Reformation is the Troubles, and that needs to not be forgotten. That the pain and suffering that was caused, essentially, not because this isn't even an act of his faith. This is, I don't believe that Henry ever believed that the church needed to be completely split from Rome. I believe he is born a Catholic and he dies a Catholic. But I believe that the money and the power of the church was attractive to him. And in doing what he did, generations of this country, of this nation, have suffered. And who knows what's coming down the pike with the next depraved act of indifference by the people who lead us, and the what might run on there. And we are seeing things start to pop up again, because there was a peace, and I hope there is a peace that continues, but it's not as stable as it could be, and it could have been more stable. And the instability in many ways is Henry's fault. And for that, I think putting him in as anyone's idea of best monarch is highly questionable. But yeah, those are my 3 heavy hitting points as to why he's absolutely not the one.
And it goes back to your first point as well. You're saying about, a good monarch, to be in the running for best monarch, you need to have left the country in a better state than you found it. I think that goes into that is that subjective. So someone like Henry would probably argue he had, because he'd split from the tyranny of Rome and blah 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 blah, and just make it up as they go along, which is exactly what elites do, who are telling us what we should be doing. Someone put Julia's put about the ruin the safety net by dissolving the monasteries. So you lose your social care, effectively, your schools, your hospitals. No care of that. Doesn't care what happens, whilst maintaining that he's caring for your mortal soul. It isn't giving a crap about your mortal soul, and certainly not your body while you're on earth either. Just ruling for it totally for his own ends.
Well, I'm just going to read you a little bit of descriptions towards the end of the summary of the argument for Henry. Henry enhanced the standing of the monarchy and helped forge a new sense of national identity and unity. His true greatness, though, lay in his acute political perception. His remarkable insight, strength of will, and subtle intellect equipped him to deploy all the forces and resources that underpin strong government. He averted religious and dynastic wars, suppressed rebellion, and maintained peace throughout his reign. He conditioned the nobility to identify with the crown rather than their own interests, or he'd cut their heads off. And he elevated England's status in Europe. He didn't say that bit. Where he helped to maintain a balance between his rivals, France and the Holy Roman Empire.
The history flaneur rocked the codpiece, though, to be fair.
Yeah, to be fair.
To be fair, he did rock the codpiece. Yeah,
So I don't know if that
I've seen
sounds like
better.
Henry VIII to any of you. I don't
well, there's a lot in there that concerns me. The fact that he what did she say about subdued rebellion or something like that? So basically, actively
he suppressed rebellion and maintained peace throughout his reign.
So that's just, you can't disagree with him, otherwise you get your head chopped off, or you get yourself thrown over a wall in chains so that your family can watch you die slowly. That's tyranny. That's
not quite the same,
peace.
Is it? No, it's not
No.
like appeasement and caring and openness and willing to negotiate and talk and
yes.
Do what I tell you, or I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, do what I tell you. I'm going to imprison you. I'm going to kill you, etc. Yeah. So watch out.
Silver Hoshi or Silver Hoshi, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Sorry, you point out that he made Mary and Elizabeth's lives pretty crappy. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I think that in all of the children of his body that sat on the throne of England, they all bear the scars of the trauma of being his child. Because I think that
John is like, bye Hal.
Bye Hal. Yeah. I think that Edward had all of the capacity to be every bit as diabolical, if not more, than his father. And in many ways, it's probably a blessed relief that he died young for the nation. Mary she wears the wounds. She absolutely wears the wounds of what was done to her mother and done to her as a teen in those really formative years. And Elizabeth is, in many ways, she wears it the best, but I think that's because the trauma is so deeply ingrained. History could we argue that it's the consequence of early modern toxic masculinity, the pressure of Tudor creation of lineage causing mental health issues? I think that's absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
But in that respect, inescapable. Because
that kind of gives an excuse.
But I think it's something that we have to consider, because we can look at it and go, you're so wicked to your daughters. Why didn't you just accept that they could have ruled? But in the way that toxic masculinity now is, deadly to both men and women. It's absolutely destructive and a terrible force for both mental health issues and physical safety and all of those sorts of things. He inhabits a world where both science and religion tell him as a matter of fact that women are imperfect men, that women are morally, physically, mentally, and spiritually inferior to men. The notion of leaving that behind to sit on your throne must have felt terrifying. I get that.
Yeah,
I do.
And it's because in other ways as well. I mean, he was preparing Mary and Elizabeth quite well, in terms of their education. If you look at other queens, I know we're going to come on to Queen Anne. We've talked about Queen Victoria already. They were not educated, ready to be the monarch, and yet they were pretty much in line. But Henry did make sure that his daughters had an education, which is an interesting twist.
But then it was fashionable. So was he educating them to be queens, like regnant queens? I don't think so. If you compare the education that his one-time BFF, his daughter Margaret More becomes Margaret Roper, her education is very similar to that which was enjoyed by Elizabeth. In fact, it seems to me that Henry is, or whoever is in charge of controlling those education systems, he's following a blueprint that's set down by Thomas More. And so is that about preparing them for monarchy?
Keeping up with the Joneses.
I think it's about fashion, and certainly the leading scholars of the day are talking about things like, if you educate a woman, what you are doing is you are essentially refining some of her worst natures, that if you educate her well enough, then perhaps, maybe, fingers crossed, she might actually have the smallest soupçon of a moral compass and not, just be a massive shagger or whatever else. So there is a kind of there's a moral remit, I guess, in educating women, which for some reason the Stuarts don't see that as being fashionable. It's almost like a complete sea change. It's like, we want you pretty but stupid. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.
But that's all. It's always like, there. It's okay because you're not even going to be asked to do anything. It's fine.
No. But then, to be fair, Charles II is also comes across as a little bit pretty but stupid too. God bless him.
Yeah, I don't think they don't seem to. The Tudors most definitely seem to value education more than their successors.
That's yes,
which is interesting. But yeah,
anyway, and arguably that's something that's continued on and on. Education is not something that's privileged. It's something that, I mean, the crown is not accurate, but Her Majesty the Queen did not enjoy the kind of education that one might expect from somebody who occupied her position of privilege. She was homeschooled in things like succession and the kind of Commonwealth ideals as they would become, but not really anything that would be recognised as a mainstream education. It was the stuff that she needed to know and not much else, from my understanding. And even like having her brownie group, they had one in the grounds, I think with sort of a select few hand-picked girls so she could do brownies. But it was, again, a very cosseted upbringing. So, yeah.
Right.
So not Henry VIII anyway.
No,
so
not
he's
Henry
out.
VIII.
We're supposed to be looking. Should we look for some good ones now?
I've got one that has his moments, but has, I think, some plus points. I'm going for Edward IV.
Okay.
Edward IV. Now, the reason...
Defend it, I beg you.
Well, no, this is mine. It's a little bit of a mixed bag.
Yep.
The reason I'm saying Edward IV is because you see him enter the fray. You know, his father dies at Wakefield, and in 1460, and all of a sudden now he's the head of the House of York. Now, there's a lot of complicated relationships in terms of who's in line to the throne, who would be better. If we hadn't have had this weak ineffectual Henry VI, then we'd never probably would have been having this conversation in the first place. But what Edward does manage to do, although he probably has Henry VI dispatched in quite a cruel way, is that for a time he brings a fair peace. Okay, I'm not saying it's morally correct, but we have got this period where he has managed to get rid of, one way or the other, Henry VII. Henry VII's son and heir, Edward, has also been killed in battle at, I can't remember. It might come back to me. Tewkesbury. So, we've got this place now where there doesn't appear, we've seen off Warwick being a bit of an idiot and all these types of things. And it's quite solid, isn't it? It's got to that point where...
he's got sons.
He's got 2 sons. He's got heirs. He's got a lot of experience. He looks the part, doesn't he? He actually inspires quite a lot of favour. A lot of people do support him. His kingship seems quite secure. It's balanced, and it does bring, it almost looks like it could have been the end of the Wars of the Roses. Really. What goes wrong, and this is where lots of things go wrong, is that he mumps it. So that's a bad start, because when you're dead, you can't be king anymore. But the problem is not just it's not just mumping it. It's the fact that he suddenly mumps it very suddenly. Everyone was like, "Whoa, we were not expecting that." And so the problem you have with Edward over time is that he has got a little bit lazy, he's got a little bit lackadaisical, he's starting to annoy people, like he really ignored his brother Richard over the Treaty of Picardy. It's a bit complicated because they all wanted to go rampaging around killing the French, and he was like, I've got a bit like old and I can't be arsed now, can we just take some money and have a bit of a cop out? So he was starting to like not exhibit all those characteristics of a great warrior king anymore. But he also had a little bit of a habit of giving and taking away. So many of his nobles and family members were very aware of the fact that if he gave them something like some lands or something, oh, I've taken this off of this person because I don't like them anymore, you could go, that's great, and you could go and you could set yourself up and you go, yeah, I've changed my mind, I'm having that back, or I'm going to give it to them instead because you've annoyed me. So he was starting to go from this very well supported king with this sort of this strength and the ideology and all these things, to starting to get on people's nerves just a little tiny bit, just a little bit. And so when he dies, he eventually dies a little bit suddenly. All these people are going, we don't know what's going on now. A little bit suddenly, rather than very suddenly. People are like, okay, well, he'd given that to that person, but it wasn't set in stone. What's going to happen to this? Where is that going to go? Who's entitled to this? So then we've got everyone's picking at the spoils, aren't they? And then, of course, we've got some priest rocks up and goes, I think you'll find them kids are illegitimate. What are you going to do about it? There it goes. So all that stability that you've gone has gone. So he might be a bit of an asshat, but for a period, he almost finished the Wars of the Roses single-handedly.
But then he went and died.
But then he spoiled the whole thing because some people have got no foresight at all by dying.
Yeah, but I mean, he finishes the War of the Roses, but he's also a king who has two reigns. He has a split reign.
He does.
Because his wee Willy Winky gets involved, doesn't it? His little wee Willy Winky. And he's like, oh, Warwick, you have essentially made me king. And what I'm going to do is say, yeah, I'll marry where you tell me to marry, because I'm now a king on the throne. I better try and stabilize this nascent dynasty of monarchy by marrying a foreign princess. Oh, whoopsie doopsie, I rather like that widowed woman over there, and I'd like to get my nut away. So can't. Oh, you've planned a betrothal, have you? Sorry, already married. Did a whoopsies. And he's then surprised. Yeah, but he shouldn't have. He should not have married Elizabeth Woodville. He shouldn't have done that. That is not what you get to do when you are a medieval monarch who's not even been born to sit on the throne. He has usurped the throne, and here he is behaving like some divine right. I get to marry who I want. Even at this point, just because Henry VIII's way of meeting wives is to open his door, look who's coming out of his wife's room and go, you'll do, I'll have you next. Just because that's how he manages his sexual congress doesn't mean that it's okay. That is, you aren't allowed to do that. And he risks everything. And arguably, had he married a foreign princess, those boys would have survived. Had their mother been a daughter of a king of France, for example, with powerful foreign uncles, not what they had, those boys would have lived. So he's a bellend as well.
I think he's a little bit less of a bellend than Henry VIII.
I mean, yes, of course he is, because he doesn't murder any of his wives.
Yeah, that's not hard. It's not hard.
Yeah, if he'd have just lived another 3, 4, 5 years, he would have been old enough to say, I don't care if a priest probably wouldn't have come along and gone, oh, we think your kids are illegitimate. They probably just would have hid away. So just
they'd have been old enough.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody, I think, would have challenged it. So it's one of those what ifs again, isn't it? If he'd have just lived another 3 or 4 years, he could have declared himself of age, and none of this.
I think you're right. I think if he'd have lived that bit longer, everything would have been stable, and we would have been looking at Edward IV and saying he did end the Wars of the Roses, and then we had a stable succession. Because that's actually what we could possibly argue for Henry VII. If you look at when he starts and when he
as well, he was my pick.
Because of course he is now, it has the badge of ending the Wars of the Roses, uniting the houses of Lancaster and York, and leaving an heir
Mhm.
for a smooth succession.
Mhm.
Yep.
He, like Kat's already said, he builds up the coffers.
Yep.
So he might be a miser, but or maybe he's just good at money management. I mean, and extorting money out of people. But anyway, but he does. So by that standard, he leaves the country in a better situation than he finds it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like Henry Tudor
I think so. I mean, he does
Imagine
what he does to the what he does to the pole boy is not good, is it?
No, they definitely
he does that little lad.
We're not going to find any angels in
be
this discussion, are we?
No, but from everything I've read, I think it's highly likely that little boy, I mean, that young man was developmentally delayed, and was, but it could have the potential to be set up as a puppet king, sure, but doing a murder of him by execution is straight bullshit. Like, that's not. He's also like he's your wife's family as well, and kind of your family, because everybody's, the inbreeding is
everyone's
everyone's related. It's terrifying. So yeah, he that's not cool.
Us.
Yeah, the executing of the people is not the one. And also, I think Empson and Dudley were shits as well, weren't they? So
I don't think. Yeah, it's a bigger discussion maybe, but that, who gets to be these people? They're not, other than maybe Henry VI. Who else could you actually claim sort of isn't egocentric and willing to do practically anything to remain in position and do what they want to do while they're there?
I think once we get to the constitutional monarchs, the further we get down that route, the way I view it, and obviously we're kind of too close to actually really assess it, but for me, I look at Her Majesty the Queen, and it looks like a burden more than anything else. It is not. Yes, I'm sure there's the wealth and that security, but holy Christ, like, it just seems bloody miserable, actually, and it's a life of service with no privacy. And I think I personally think that our current queen should be on the list of the greatest monarchs, because we have somebody who is she served her country in the military in World War II. She has served her country for 70 years. Has she always got it right? No. Has she, for the most part, done her best with the human limitations of being a person? Yeah, I think she kind of has. I think that the monarch, the nation will be poorer when she is no longer walking on its soil. And I also think that, just for, if nothing else, as a repository of political knowledge, this is a woman whose first prime minister was Winston Churchill. This is a woman who has had conversations with Winston Churchill and every other prime minister after him. And to have that,
what she thinks.
Yes, so would I.
And that's it, isn't it? And but to have that as a vessel of understanding, what an extraordinary loss. And hopefully it's not something that's going to happen soon.
I feel like she boxes I feel like she boxes their ears. But
in the most kind of like polite, passive aggressive way, like the most British way.
Well, because she'll be able to. Well, she would never call bullshit in the way that we do, but I'm really, that she'll say something. I bet she can cut. She can cut someone down because of her knowledge and experience. She's been through so much. She's seen the cogs of time go round and round, and things come round again, and yeah, a little frown. John says, yeah, she's probably just got a look. She doesn't even have to say anything. Yeah. I'd love to have known what the meeting with Tony Blair was like after he decommissioned the Royal Yacht Britannia. I was talking to Gareth Russell about that yesterday. But anyway, yeah, that would have been an interesting conversation to be fly on the wall for.
I mean, I do think we get a sense of actually how her prime ministers view her. When David Cameron was indiscreet and overheard about how she responded on the phone to the news of the Scottish independence vote, and he talked about how she purred with pleasure or some shit that he should never have said out loud in a place where it could have been heard. But what that tells me is he wants to please her. It was like a little boy who'd pleased his favorite teacher. And I know there will be people who don't think that's a good thing, but my belief is that experience is a great teacher. And my goodness, wouldn't it be a privilege if you were a prime minister to get to, or indeed she meets other members of parliament, to sit down with her and to have the wisdom of she has literally seen this all before. She has lived long enough and she has been queen long enough that she has seen this cycle happen already. And they're foolish, they don't listen.
Well, experience is a good teacher, but you have to listen. And she comes across to me, at least, as someone who has taken notice and learnt from the experiences. Plenty of people who have experience and don't seem to learn from it, but she does. I think you're right. She's going to be ridiculously sorely missed. And Julia makes the point: how many of us have ever known any other queen?
Yeah. It's going to be weird.
I don't think the vast majority of people even realize how woven in to the fabric of our everyday life she is. Because she reigns, she doesn't rule. I think that it's we don't really, so many people don't really recognize how much she's involved. I think, though, we got a sense of it in the aftermath of the death of Diana, when everybody got really, really angry because their grandma wasn't there for their grief, because that's how everybody actually saw her. And that's how everybody does see her, that they have an ownership of her, a possession. I look back on it now and I'm like, well, because she actually had grandchildren who were grieving their own living, breathing mother, who was now no longer living and breathing, and protecting those boys, as she had done after the assassination of her cousin. She took his children. She looked after his children. So that's what she was doing. And I think it was presented and read really, really unfortunately. And it was seen as a slight on Diana, whereas, I mean, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe I'm looking at it through rose-tinted spectacles, but I think it was about being a grandmother rather than a queen, personally.
Certainly. I think with hindsight as well, it helps us to look back. I remember it being extreme. Obviously, it was a ridiculously emotional time. No one even, I think a lot of people didn't even know how much they admired Diana until she died. And then, I think you're right. People were like, well, where's the Queen? But the press hyped it up big style as well. The Queen's not here. She should be. Yes. Everyone's like, yes, she should be, shouldn't she? You know? We have to be careful where the press take us, and it's a perfect example of that.
Yeah,
the outrage, they fired that up. They could.
Well, I wonder why.
Said,
we're not.
I'm sure
guys.
sales
were
wonderful.
Guys.
Yeah,
I mean, weren't 3 weeks earlier, weren't they shit talking her on the front pages? Because they did that. Yeah. So 3 weeks. Weren't they the ones paying for the paparazzi to chase? I wonder why they wanted to find somebody else to blame.
Yeah, and I'm sure their sales were absolutely fantastic. Those weeks as well. But so they could equally have talked about the fact that she's up in. Was she at Balmoral? I think at the time. I
believe so.
She was somewhere, looking after the boys, keeping them sheltered. Blah blah blah. They chose not to do that. I think we have a winner, but it's interesting actually. Maybe it's a topic for another time. But that change from, you've mentioned it, from a ruling monarch to a reigning monarch, that change to constitutional monarchy, and how that actually, because we talk about Britain's greatest monarch. It's late. Britain's greatest monarch. But they're not all created equal, that, if you know what I mean, as in that the situations that they ruled in are so different. And that's a big differentiator, the constitution, going into a constitutional monarchy, because effectively what we did was replace the monarch with a prime minister. But I'm going
this is working out really well right now.
It's super.
It's anyway, we could get on to that.
Joanne
that's
just
an interesting
said
one in the Stuart era, but
Joanne's just put in that she sees a few cars in Connecticut with a Queen Elizabeth photo on their auto. Does that mean, is that on like their number plate? What do you mean on their auto? That's my goodness. I mean, don't take it to Boston. Don't drive to Boston with that. That's a risk. That's amazing. Her face is branded.
Does she get to use a stamp as like a form of ID? It's me. So just as an FYI, because I think we're coming up to, we've got 10 minutes. So it's been stopping us at an hour, basically. So what I'm going to do before an hour is stop it and then start it back up, just in case it cuts us off randomly. Because I think we all wanted to put a case for at least one person that's not on this list, but just so that you know, and that they've listed the arguments are sort of in chronological order. So we've gone, so that you know who's in here, David I, Henry II.
And David I is Scotland. That's David I, King of Scotland.
Oh, is it? Have I got the wrong one? Who's the
no.
Welsh
No, you're right.
There is a Welsh.
David I is Scotland. Yeah.
Sorry. That was awful.
Yeah.
Because that's his name, David. That was terribly Welshist, wasn't it? Do you think that's subliminally in my brain somewhere? Do you think that's what happened? Then we had and then Llewellyn ap. Oh, I can't pronounce that. I'm so sorry. Llewellyn ap Llyworth, who is probably a tiny bit Welsh. Edward IV, Henry VII, Henry VIII, Elizabeth Gloriana, James VI and First, George III. That one surprised me, actually. I went with that a bit more than I thought I might. Queen Victoria,
me too, actually.
George V and Elizabeth II.
Oh, so George, quite a few of them already.
George V as well. I went for a bit more than perhaps I would have done initially. So
the later monarchs,
definitely worth the read. Definitely worth the read for sure. But there were some. I think we've definitely covered the main two ones of those. But I thought some really well put together arguments and some food for thought. So I was definitely worth a go. Chaps and chapesses.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to go round Philippa, because we went.
I'm going to go round.
May I ask, Catherine, as we are so close to it being the hour, shall we stop and restart and do the go around in the next one? What do you reckon? Let's. So then we have the on the playback. It looks like a part 1 and a part 2. So this is end of part 1. Please stick around and come back for part 2, which will start as soon as Catherine figures out how her finger works.
It was well, my other half's watching, so you could pop him a message. It came up just now. Dark Black Winter started following you. I thought, you cheeky fucker. I'm your bloody girlfriend. I've had your kid in. And then I realised it was History After Dark, not me. Then he started following it. I was like, there were going to be words. If he's still watching now, he's probably like, oh. Anyway, on that note, you've got about like 30 seconds to a minute to have a psychological wee and get a drink.
Yep. Yeah. Have a pee, have a drink, but quickly.
And we'll see you in a moment.
Bring your thoughts, bring your monarchs.
And we'll see you on the flip
I
side.
want to see what everyone else thinks. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Do. Boo.
Boo.